Hey, good morning. Patricia Murphy here. It's Saturday. This is Seattle Now. Today, we're bringing you the best from another KUOW podcast, Meet Me Here. This is the biggest weekend for Pride celebrations in Seattle as June comes to a close. We talked on Casual Friday about queer movies and representation in media. Meet Me Here's Katie Campbell spoke to local author Corinne Manning about their new collection of short stories, We Had No Rules, about being a queer author telling queer stories and why the LGBTQ shelf is the best shelf in the bookstore. Here's Katie and Corinne.
We started by talking about what exactly it means to write queer literature today. It's a question they explore in the second story in We Had No Rules, in which the narrator is finding themselves romantically and creatively. They break the fourth wall several times, wondering aloud if the reader will keep reading if they write quote-unquote lesbian fiction or quote-unquote queer fiction. They're figuring out what these distinctions even mean. So I asked Corinne, what are the subgenres of queer literature today, and what does it mean to them to be a queer writer?
Oh my gosh, what an intense question to jump in.
Sorry, I have the habit of that.
I'm like, whoa, are you a Pisces?
Scorpio, actually.
Okay,
thank you.
There we go. All right. That was the very first story that I wrote that ended up becoming this collection. And it came about after having worked on a novel like that focused around like a trans parent and a family for years and years and years. And then I got feedback that, and this was, 2012, something like that. I got feedback that it had too many queer characters and that it would be put in the LGBTQ shelf. Now I'm like, that's the best shelf. In the bookstore, it's the best shelf. In the library. But in that moment, I had this reckoning because I realized that I had been trying to write a mainstream book and trying to write queerness or gayness in a way that was digestible in a mainstream standard, and I had failed. And so I actually went through this period of not writing at all. Then finally I sat down to write, and I wrote those first words, oh, fuck it, I'm writing lesbian fiction. And I realized that I had been censoring myself this whole time, and what happened if I just was flagrantly queer? And so I don't even know if I can really speak to all the different subgenres of queer literature, but I think we're in a really cool moment where there is a proliferation of queer characters in a real way. There's where we are seeing books that are able to come out now that weren't able to come out a few years ago. It's everywhere. And I think that there's so much exciting stuff happening with trans fiction, especially right now. And I think all the speculative that exists within that. And I think within queer and trans fiction, there's a lot of rule breaking that can happen in terms of form.
Totally. Yeah, asking you to talk about the subgenres of queer literature is asking you to speak about the subgenres of all literature, right? As many subgenres as there are in literature exists in queer literature as well. It's all part of this really beautiful web of often interconnecting ideas and genres. Also in We Had No Rules, you seem to be kind of wondering aloud in the way a writer does about what it means to write queer literature as well as to be queer and the spectrum of queerness that you explore in these short stories. Was that something you were deliberately looking at in this collection?
Yeah, this collection is full of my anxieties. It's I was writing this book, I was probably 29 when I was really writing these stories. Wow. And then the book itself came out, in my late 30s. But a lot of my anxieties had to do with this fact of the failure of queerness. And by which I mean there's this idealism of what could be possible and who we want to be in the world in terms of how we care for each other, how we show up for our communities, how we show up for justice movements, and then how we fail each other in the most intimate ways. And so that was how I decided to face these anxieties I was having, where I was there's all these beautiful characters who are so flawed, who have this idealized dream of what queerness can bring them, and then they just keep facing their own complicity again and again.
I want to skip ahead to a question I had kind of about that. I mean, the concept of community is a part of many of these stories, and I recently interviewed Mike Corrado for the show about his adult debut graphic novel, Gaysians, and we talked a lot about community. In Mike's book, community was this uplifting, very secure force throughout the storyline of these 4 gay Asian men who find each other, and they are each other's chosen family. But in We Had No Rules, your characters' communities often failed them, or at least seemed to let them down in a way. So, for example, in the story 90 Days, a couple separates and decides to go 90 days without talking to each other. And our narrator spirals. Like, she can't even bear to go to the grocery store they used to go to because she's afraid she'll run into her ex. And at one point, she can't even get a friend to go for her. And they kind of make up this really flimsy excuse. And on page 93, the narrator asks herself, what was the point of being in community if you could be so easily thrust from it? Can I exist if I'm only in relation to myself? I guess, what do you want readers to take away from that?
I think a big element that I was exploring in this is like what happens, like how whiteness plays a role in community, but like how even amongst white queers, how they have these ideals, but then don't know how to love, how to show up for each other. And by each other, I don't just mean other white queers. I just mean like the full community. And I think there are so many beautiful moments of community.
Yeah.
It's just that this book is zeroing in on these moments where things feel flimsy. And I think at the time that I was writing this book, I was reckoning with that. And I was new to Seattle. I didn't have community. And so I kind of created all these flawed characters who became my community. I felt like I had kinship with them because they were also lost or they were also grieving. They were also yearning and not achieving the thing that they wanted so desperately. And so I think what I want people to take away from it is that like these moments exist at the same time that these like beautiful moments of like fusion and connection and possibility exist too.
There's a passage on page 70 from the story Chewbacca and Clyde. Love that, by the way. Very fun. And I think it captures this sense of finding oneself. Have you ever gotten carried away or felt more in touch with yourself than you've ever felt for a long time? And it's brought on not necessarily by the proximity of another person or by longing, but by a day of bright, clear sun or swimming in warm water and feeling the whateverness of your own body. And I really love that. I read that several times back to myself and was just like, wow, it's just beautiful. It's really amazing prose.
Thank you.
And so I want to ask, like, what is that whateverness for you?
You know, coming at this from like a trans perspective, I think it's like the creatureliness of one's own body, the animalness. I think that is what it means to me. And I think that is what it meant to that character in that particular moment of these moments where perhaps the rules that govern how we interact with each other that might restrict, where we restrict ourselves, those moments where those dissolve. And for some people, it is like when they're on like a dance floor at some really good party during Pride. For other people, it's when they're at Denny Blaine Beach or at Coleman. Like these moments where like kind of like being with other people who are being with their creatureliness, and like that helps you feel this idea of the like whateverness of you. Like how bizarre to be in a body.
Totally. That weirdness, like it shows up too in how we interact with others. And part of our goal with this podcast is to bring people together out in the world. And that's also what I want to accomplish with the KUOW Book Club. And this month I chose your book, We Had No Rules, and Be a Revolution by Ijeoma Oluo. And I think your book pairs really well with Be a Revolution because your stories explore rules and the way they can bind us and the way they can define us. I want to know why you think it's important to recognize the rules that govern us, or at least try to.
Everything is story, ultimately. Everything is story. And so like we get to decide as humans, as activists, like how are we going to defy the narratives that have been placed upon us.
Yeah.
And how can we break through those narratives? And I think we do need to like look at those kinds of narratives. And so, I was thinking about the structures that I was kind of forced to learn in a very traditional MFA program of like how a story gets told. And what I ended up deciding to do with this was like, what happens if I take like Steinbeck's structures of stories, but I put queer people into them? And even like a story where a professor is perhaps doing something weird with power with a student, but it's like a queer mask person, a queer white mask person. Do you like what they're doing? What does that say about you? What does that say about us? That all I needed to do was change something about the presentation, but it's the same story. So I think anything that has us deepen our analysis, like that's why we need to look at the like structures in front of us, why we need to look at the rules, because there's all these ways. I say this in my book, a character says like there are all these like systems like underneath the ground, like there's the plumbing overhead, there's the electricity, and all you need to do is plug into them. And in the same way, all these systems of harm, all these systems of violence and oppression are the air we breathe and the water we drink. We just plug right into them. And so like, how do we actually unplug from them? How do we create anything new? I think we have to kind of delve into and examine and see the messy, disgusting, brutal water that we're drinking.
Corinne Manning is the author of We Had No Rules. Thank you so much for this conversation.
I appreciate you.
Thanks for listening to Seattle Now. Meet Me Here is hosted by Dyer Oxley, Jeannie Yandel, and Katie Campbell. It's produced by Kyle Norris, Brandy Fullwood, and Matt Martin. If you want to hear more, search up Meet Me Here wherever you get your podcasts or listen on the KUOW app. Our production team includes Caroline Chamberlain-Gomez, Andy Hurst, Vaughn Jones, Brooklyn Jamerson Flowers, and Paige Browning. Greg Kramer does our theme music. Seattle Now and KUOW Public Radio are members of the NPR network. I'm Patricia Murphy. See you soon.